Live chair.
What is up, Hope? Good morning. This is the meeting of the finance panel. Mainly to look at the second quarter capital revenue report and the capital and revenue report for the second quarter. But I'm aware that some members are struggling to join us this morning. But first item on the agenda is apologies. Kath, you have one apology, I understand.
Yes, Chair, from Councillor Glyn Preston, and we have been notified that Councillor David Thomas will be joining us a little bit later.
And I've also had a quick note from Councillor Radcliffe. He will be joining us fairly soon as well. So, but for the members and officers here, welcome. Also like to welcome Chair of Governance and Finance Committee, Lynn here this morning. You were at the bottom of my screen for a moment, and then you popped up to the top. But so I thought I'd lost you for a moment, Lynn. But good to see you this morning as well. So welcome all. Can I also welcome Craig Flynn, his first meeting of the finance panel. He's recently joined Powys County Council. Craig, can you just tell me what your title is? It's a Deputy Section 151 Officer, I understand.
That's correct, Chair. My full title is Deputy Head of Financial Services.
Deputy Financial Services, great. And you bring a wealth of experience to Powys County Council, so welcome. It's good to see you here. First item on the agenda, after apologies, is declarations of interest. Please, if there's, Jeremy, Councillor Pugh.
Jeremy's fine now, thank you. Can I say, first of all, I'm having a problem hearing this morning somehow that the voice is coming very, very low. And secondly, my wife's had quite a big operation, and I might have to shoot now in a bit for 5 minutes just to help her get up and then come back. So if I have a phone call and I disappear, it's just I've got to go and do my other duty for a minute.
No, I understand your wife hasn't been well, so best wishes to her and hopes for a speedy recovery, and quite understand, Jeremy. Thank you very much indeed. Next item on the agenda is minutes of the last meeting held on the 15th of September. I hope you've all had a chance to have a look at them. Are you happy that that's a true record of that meeting? Yep, Elvin's got his hand up, and Pete.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, Chair. Sorry, Alan.
Oh, go on.
I just wanted to check one thing. On item 7, I thought we'd agreed to add the terms of reference to the forward work programme, but didn't see that noted in the minutes.
Yes, we were going to do that. I know Jane had hoped to complete. Jane, you're on mute, Jane. Sorry.
I think, Councillor Pete, it was actually on the minutes before the session before, and I think we've got a little delayed in getting those agreed. So I think they are on the agenda for today. I know Councillor Allard and myself haven't met to actually review them yet, but we'll pick that up a little bit later on.
Okay, thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Jane. Is everybody happy to accept those minutes as they stand now? Okay. Thank you. And then item 4 on page 17, recommendations to Cabinet. Oh, and apologies. Did we want to comment on actions that flow out of those minutes? I should have. There were a list of actions somewhere, Kath. I can't quickly scrolling through them.
Do you want me to share my screen?
Yes,
I've got
please.
the Power BI up, if that's all right.
Great. Thank you,
Okay.
Kath. I got too many screens open. Apologies.
Okay, please let me know when you can
It's coming
see
up now.
that.
Yeah, brilliant. Can you make it into
Okay.
a
I can make it slightly larger.
presentation? What mode?
Is that better? Can everybody see that?
That's okay for me. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
So we had just quick
So
question on the Bro Hethgain one, the timescales. And Kath, can you scroll down? As you can see, the actual spades going into the ground in September 25, I think it was. I can't see it there. Oh, there you are. Construction starts August 25, and school will open 2 years later. So that is a current timescale. It has obviously slipped over the past couple of years. The Capital Efficiency Works grant, that £2.2 million grant. I was a little bit concerned about this because it was actually received before the budget was agreed. It was award letter was dated 2nd of February. So it was known about before. Budget decisions were taken on this 23-24, and that grant was for the following year, was it, Jane, for this financial year, or was it for the work done in previous financial year?
It was a grant that came in late, and it was to be utilised in that financial year. But what we were able to do was to offset costs that had already been incurred, and then utilise the funding that releases in this next year. So it was on that basis of the grant.
Okay, because at the budget setting meeting, there was an additional £500,000, or was it £200,000 additional to help with energy efficiency during the 12 months, wasn't there?
It was an additional item, I think, that came through in the budget proposal, but it was an amendment to the original budget proposal, if I recall correctly.
Clearly, knowing about that £2.2 million capital award in February would have been really useful when setting that budget, but slight frustration there. So, but thank you for that information, Jane. Next, oh yeah, I think this was a query raised by you, Councillor Jeremy, around the grants returned to Welsh Government because they weren't spent, basically. Jane, you weren't aware of any?
No, and I've done some check, but I know Councillor Jeremy and myself have had an email exchange just recently, and we feel for that one and the second one, I think, Councillor Jeremy, we were going to meet to go through it in a little bit more detail.
Apologies, when there's a presentation, I can't see if Jeremy is still, yeah, no, Jeremy is here.
He is
No.
there, yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the one was the uplift on the health board when we accepted the money, which the uplift would have been more than the money we accepted, in my opinion. And the other one, I'm coming back to get clarity on, and I'll be back to you when we meet now shortly, Jane.
Yeah.
Good. So hopefully both of you can report back when that meeting's happened. Terms of reference for the committee, Councillor Pete and I met with you, Jane. We had a discussion around it. You were going to pull together. I don't know if you've actually pulled together a revised or refreshed the terms of reference.
I haven't. I have to apologise, Chair. So I will make sure that we complete that this week and circulate it to the panel, and then we can officially sign it off at our next meeting. I think we're okay in terms of the cycle, because any change would need to go to Democratic Services Committee, and I think that committee is not due to meet now until February, so we won't miss the chance to get those sorted.
Okay. and it certainly doesn't stop us carrying on with our work now. So thank you, Jane.
This was an action for the last meeting, Chair.
Yes, with the property, was that on capital receipts, was it?
Yes.
Can we, is that the whole of the narrative we can see there in that last column?
A little bit down at the bottom.
Oh, a little bit on that. Can we pick up on that when we come to the capital programme?
Okay.
Or, but there's a little bit more on that. I know it's blue, it's been sort of signed off as complete, but I do want to revisit that slightly.
Yeah.
But we can pick up that with Councillor Thomas when we look at the capital expenditure. The next two capital programme timelines report. Yes. It would just be that's an ongoing one, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it would be good to see, so we can compare reports to see if there's any slippage on these capital programs, because they're always very ambitious with the timelines when they first pull together, and then when the reality comes, it is difficult to deliver sometimes on that original timeline. High school. Sorry, Jane.
I was just going to add that in terms of the capital report and the revenue report, we feel now heads of service have improved some of the narrative that they include in those reports. So I'm hoping that does give everybody a better feel for where they are. But you can review that now when you see the quarter two.
Good, and that's a narrative on the last one as well, which specifically talks about schools. With that, we won't focus too much on the schools delegated this time, because we've got a joint scrutiny with education, learning and skills scrutiny on Friday. So we'll pick up a lot on that during Friday's meeting under the chairmanship of Councillor Gwynfor. Thanks, Kath. That's about end of the tracker there. So there's still a couple of things to take care of there. So on to item 4, the our recommendations and the responses from Cabinet on page 17. Yeah, page 17. Okay, you can see the response there from Cabinet in this second column. They seem to accept most of those items. Any comment from panel? No? Oh, Councillor Peat, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on the comment on the 10-year plan there, I wasn't quite sure whether that was a no, we're not going to do one, or yes, we'll do a very vague one.
Will I answer that one, Chair?
I think yes.
Yeah. I think it was felt that to actually publish a 10-year programme would be a little vague and a little sparse, and things do change over that period of time. So I think Cabinet were more keen to have a 5-year plan that's published, even if we've got a working plan that does extend beyond those years. And then as that becomes more firm, I suppose, in terms of that longer term plan, that will feed then into the more detailed 5-year published plan. So I think that was the feeling. And I think at an EMT level, that seems to be what we would prefer to do, although having that 10-year plan in the background is absolutely critical to good financial planning.
So in theory, there should have been some commentary in the third column, shouldn't there? Third and fourth column. Because I think we were talking about a published plan, and we, you know, I don't know whether you want to comment on this, Lynn, but it is something that you raised, that governance and finance, governance and audit. Apologies.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Yes, governance and audit had the governance and audit committee were expressing some concern about the overall financial position and the forecast financial position for the next 3 years, you know, obviously in the light of Welsh Government decisions and the UK national overall fiscal position, and the extent to which the budgetary decisions could and would be demonstrably informed by a clear and coherent and well articulated and communicated strategic plan that would be operationalised to deliver the changes in service that would be required to endeavour to remain within the budgetary position. I think for Governance and Audit Committee, this conversation probably hasn't finished, but it will remain a live discussion as to how the committee is best assured that there is the right balance between budgetary and financial planning and strategic planning going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. And Gareth, you're also on the governance and audit.
Thank you, Chair. Just to build on what Lynn has just said, then I chair a subgroup looking at capital programme. And when you look at the gestation period and the build period, for example, with the schools programme, it'd be pretty difficult to fit that within a 5-year time horizon. So that's why we're pushing for 10 years. So I'd go for that. But if you've got a 5-year plan, it should be a 5-year rolling plan. So it's extended every year. It doesn't expire after 5 years and then renew another one.
No. That is as it is now, really. And we did used to have a 10-year program, but the Ysgol Bro-Hawddgain, the rebuild there sort of demonstrates this. It's been, you know, there was a commitment about 2 or 3 years ago for that rebuilding, probably longer, Elwyn. I can't quite remember the dates now, but clearly that's, you know, the potentially opening of that school is now in 2027. So it spans quite considerably more than 5 years. So that's, and when you're looking at that longer term vision, especially when we need that longer term vision with the challenges that the council face. But I accept that the council or the cabinet do have it in the background. Jane, you do have that sort of 10-year longer term in the background, but I don't see any harm in having it published. I really don't, because people do accept that there will be changes, and that's an argument to be had again. So sorry, Jane.
I was just going to say, really, I think because of the timing of knowing what our funding is going to be like, you know, we still get, although we've got an indicative 2-year settlement at the moment, it's still not very long term. So trying to plan when you only know what your income levels are going to be, and particularly around grant funding that supports some of those projects as well. The grant contributions are significant for some of those capital works, intervention rates of 65% across schools. And of course, until you know when that funding, or when we are clearer as to whether it's coming or not, it is difficult for a plan, and it can have to flex quite a lot. But it's just to be mindful of that, I think, isn't it?
I do accept that, but in other papers on school transformation in the north of Powys, the North Powys transformation, there is talk of a 10-year plan within that, and you know, a new build within 10 years or towards the end of the 10 years. So clearly, if some services are talking about it publicly, about having a capital program, it does need to be sort of put into a structure. Even though there's uncertainty, you can have those footnotes, always have those footnotes about the uncertainties about funding and what funding will be available to support that program, because almost all the capital programs are supported by, to some degree, by funding. But right, it'll be an ongoing discussion, no doubt. But thank you, and thank you, Pete, for raising that. Any other issues on that item 4? No. Good. Just to say that, well, perhaps I can take a view of the panel. I'm not particularly happy with the response from Cabinet. Should we be pushing it back against that and asking again that we are not, well, or perhaps just saying that we are not happy with that response? I can see a nod. Pete and then Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with you actually there, Chair, because that was really the thinking behind my question there, was it just didn't give enough detail to be able to understand what the answer actually was. So yeah, I would support a pushback for some more information.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've covered most of the aspects off. The environment is quite uncertain, and I think it's probably pragmatic that they're just taking this cautious approach. As Jane has said, you know, 1 minute you're dealing with 11% inflation, the next minute it's 5%. And there's a forecast now that's saying it could go back up to 8%. You know, fuel prices at a moment have come down, but in January they're on about those going up, and as a consequence, everything gets thrown. So I think it's right to ask the questions and go back and, you know, push for a clearer clarity, but giving them a little bit of credit is, I think they're doing the best with the job they've got at the moment, with the information that's available. So I think, yeah, the principle is right, but I think we just got to give a little bit of tolerance, because the environment is very different to what other councils have faced at this point in time.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And those inflation impacts the very short-term budgets as much as anything. Yeah. But so it is always difficult. Gareth.
Yeah, thank you. Morning. Apologies for my late return, a bit of an IT issue here. But yes, just the question is for me, following from Chris, and it's for the officers really, what is the turnaround for these reports and the information that's coming in? Because obviously it's not as simple as the report is here, it's time to develop the report, everything, and are we allowing the flexibility in exchange, in the change of rate and the impact? Because obviously bills come later and everything else like that, that's got to be put all within there. I agree, it needs to be a little bit more meat on the bones and understanding, but obviously our reporting system, does that allow us to make reactive comments, or is it a snapshot in time? So we could be commenting on something that is correct at the time it is, but it's moved on in that short period. So I just want to know from Jane if there's a little bit of understanding on the timings of the reports and the information we look at, how we can manage that with the changing rates.
I think, to be fair, when we keep a constant eye on changing rates, and every time we do a close down, we do close down the accounts on a monthly basis. So we would look at the current situation on an ongoing basis, and we would reflect that in our forecasts and in our planning, so it's as up to date as possible. You may then see reports at a quarterly basis, but they would be reflecting and totally reflected much sooner than that, and consistently.
Thank you both, but I'm sure Governors and Audit will also be taking this up as well. Thank you all. And now, going forward to the work programme on page 21 and beyond. It's there for information. Any comments? It sets out the timetable for the budget scrutiny and stuff going forward in the new year as well. Clearly, the timeline is really tight as always, but it's there. Hopefully, we can populate it as we go along. Thanks all. I'm conscious I haven't actually seen Councillor Thomas pop up yet. Is David in the meeting? Can anybody?
Not yet, Chair. It was due about 10 o'clock, I thought.
Ah, okay. Because we got the council tax base report now. Jane, are you leading this, or was David going to lead on it?
I've actually got Andrew here with me. I'm putting
Andrew.
Andrew on the spot a bit. If Andrew's not ready to present it, then I can do my best. But Andrew is far more able than myself, so I don't know. Andrew, do you want to just run through the overview of the report?
Yeah, no problem. Morning.
Good morning, Andrew. Many of the committee members may not have met you before. Can you introduce yourself and say what your role is within the finance team?
Yeah, so morning all. Andrew Griffiths. I am Income Awards Manager. Part of that remit is to oversee council tax. So setting up the council tax base is a function I undertake with annually, basically. So to give an overview, the council tax base is a calculation, a best estimate of the number of Band D properties that would pay council tax in the future year coming up, so 24-25. It looks at the number of properties, and it only takes into account the number of discounts, exemptions, premiums, or disabled bands that may apply to arrive at a figure. We then embed a assumed collection rate. So for 24-25, we're assuming the collection rate of 98.5%, which is the same as the current year. And then VAT is used by a number of bodies. So it's for the county council to use to help determine what the council tax Band D charge will be next year. We also shared tax base calculation with the Police and Crime Commissioner, with the 110 town and community councils. So it helps them to formulate the precept and what their Band D charge would be. And it also goes to Welsh Government as it forms part of the RSG calculation and the authority settlement for 24-25. So that's pretty much, it's quite a technical report. As I said, it breaks all the properties in the tax base at the moment, and it calculates it back to a Band D charge.
Good. I quite like looking at these calculations, but maybe other panel members are not so keen. Karina.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Is it all like Band D full-time equivalents, if you know what I mean? So if everybody was paying a full Band D, you get 64,000 in Powys, roughly.
Yes. So it takes the account of the assumptions and the ratio between the bands. So within Powys we have a number of Band A's, B's, C's, D's, right through to Band I. So it's calculated back to Band D equivalent.
And are there quite a lot of discounts? As if maybe I don't understand the tables correctly.
Yes, so the discounts, the main discount will be the 25% single person discount.
Right.
We've also got a range of exemptions, which would be 100% exemption from council tax, and disabled band reduction. So if someone qualifies for disabled band reduction, it reduces the band by 1.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask another question about when the valuation will be updated, because I think there's probably haven't we been waiting 20 years for, wasn't the last valuation done about 20 years ago?
Yes, correct. So obviously council tax came in 1993, so properties were originally valued then. In Wales, we undertook a revaluation in 2005. England hasn't had one since 1993. So in 2005, an additional band in Wales was introduced as well, so the highest band at I. But we are awaiting actually an announcement tomorrow from the Finance Minister regarding council tax reform. I understand there's going to be a minister's statement tomorrow, and there's a potential for a revaluation and a review of council tax, really. So we're waiting with interest to see what is going to be proposed within the minister's statement. So we may be heading for a revaluation maybe in 2025.
Thank you very much.
Just on that news before I bring Pete in, the revaluation, what happened last time? I've heard a lot said that there was a shift of resource from Powys into areas where the average banding is lower. Did that happen last time? Perhaps it was before your time in 2005, Andrew. Because they've been talking about restructuring of local taxation for a few years now, and they always say it's too complicated, and the losers will always complain. You never hear a word from the winners when it comes to local government taxation, and the drive in the end, I think, was just for a simple revaluation. How will that impact Powys, and how did it work out back in 2005?
Yeah, you're right, Chair. Unfortunately, I don't have that information to hand as to what the outcome was of the revaluation and how it affected Powys back in 2005. This is some data we could go back and locate and share for future reference.
On an all Wales basis as well, in a way, it's just how it as well. It'd be interesting to see. I can see Jane's got a hand up on this as well. I'd better be careful how I term this. Perhaps you go back further than Andrew. Jane.
Not even I go back as far as that, working in finance. So I'm similar to Andrew. I don't recall exactly what happened last time, but we can have a look at that. Interestingly, that's the briefing that Councillor David and I have got after this meeting, is around that council tax reform. So I guess very soon now we'll start to understand what that's likely to look like, and how then that will potentially impact on us alongside every other authority in Wales. So we're all keenly awaiting a bit more information around that, and we can share that with you obviously as soon as we're able to.
It'd be really good to see, because from a couple of years ago when I saw they just put up a map showing where there was a positive response to some councils, neutral and negative, and places like Monmouthshire, Powys, Vale of Glamorgan, who had a higher than average council tax banding, it had a negative impact. So my fear is that that resource from Welsh Government will be diverted towards those areas with a lower average council tax banding. So it'd be good to have feedback from that meeting, Jane. Really appreciate that. Gareth.
Thank you very much. Yeah, could you just help me just understand it? Because actually, Alan, I agree with you. I get a little bit geeky about these. I quite like going through them and trying to work them out and what the hidden consequences are in there. On Appendix 2, no property charges and how that equates. So is that the difference, because obviously you've got next year's, you've got this year's is a difference, which is the no charges. So that's the number of houses that are discounted or not paying any council tax, etc., etc.
Okay, so Appendix 2, it breaks the tax base down to each town community council.
Yeah.
So this is their Band D equivalent properties that would pay Band D council tax next year. That's the estimate. So the properties change is whether it's gone up or down. So a positive is the tax base has increased. A negative, the tax base has reduced. Reductions are largely due to a change, not in number of properties tend to grow, but it's the discounts and exemptions that may increase. And then you have it as a percentage change just for reference.
Yeah. So looking at the ones that are in a positive, their tax base will increase, and that will also increase for the community councils.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful to know. Thank you.
Just to expand that a little bit. Everybody looks at their own community council here. So I look at my own community council. There's sort of an additional 23 houses being built within the area. But the banding has gone down. So how do you explain that? I mean, the council tax base has gone down.
Yeah, so it's if it'll be the number of discounts and exemptions, disabled band deductions that generally will have a negative impact overall on the tax base.
So potentially, if there's a greater increase in single person households, that will counteract the additional houses within the community.
Yeah, it's a playoff basically, isn't it? So if you've got a new build development going on, and we have to make an assumption for new builds that will come in to the list, added into the council list by the Valuation Office agency. So but it's important, we do regular reviews of all the discounts. We're just about to start a large exercise to review single person discount, for example. So it's ensuring that our records are accurate and correct, because the implications is that lower tax base if the discounts and exemptions aren't correctly in payment.
I know Pete will want to come back on the exemptions. You might well come in now, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Yeah, so I had 2 points actually, if I may. Was just on those exemptions there, Andrew. I think I was looking there. It's about 23,000 dwellings, which is about 37% that have got either the 25 or 50% discount. And I guess the question I just had in my mind is, do we have any control over those percentages? And if so, how is that discretion exercised?
The level of discounts and exemptions granted is set in legislation. So a single person discount will be 25%, and exemptions will be 100%. So there's no discretion on those percentages that we can award.
Thank you.
Sorry, Pete, can I just expand on that? So there's absolutely no flexibility within this that Powys has got?
Not for the statutory discounts and exemptions, no.
But are there other exemptions that Powys apply or not?
The only discretion we have is the locally defined discounts, which is we commonly know as our Section 13As. So we would give discretionary discounts and exemptions, for example, if the property was flooded or affected by fire, and where the statutory discount doesn't apply, so we exercise our discretion, but those are a small number as compared to the statutory instruments. So,
and relatively small value compared to
and short term, if the property's been damaged by fire or flood, is generally a sort of a 6-9 month discount or exemption we would give them.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Sorry, Pete.
No, that's fine, Alice. Sorry. Yeah, and then the other one, again, I'm not sure if you may have the figures to hand, Andrew, but I was looking at the comments on tax on long-term empty properties, and I didn't know how big a figure that tax actually was. I didn't know how effective we are in terms of collecting that tax. And I guess the other point was, what do we do if a property has been left derelict for a number of years?
Yes, so the number of long-term empties is formulated within the tax base. The collection, we do track it. It's slightly down on the standard rate of collection, but like any unpaid council tax, we don't stop collecting it as at the 31st of March. We keep pursuing that debt owed to the council, and inevitably we do get to the same collection rate, albeit several months after the proper standard collection rate.
And can you explain the role of the Valuation Office Agency, VOA, with when it comes to uninhabitable type issues, and once the Valuation Office has given a property abandoning, there's a legal duty on the council to collect?
Yes,
it's important to understand. We as a council, we don't have that flexibility.
No. Yeah, what is the VOA, who's independent, obviously, of local authorities, will maintain the council tax list, and they make the decision as to whether a property is subject to council tax. So if it's in the list, they will be a chargeable property, and then we would then consider if there's any appropriate discounts or exemptions that may apply. So for long-term empty derelict properties, the Class A is the one where the properties requiring or undergoing major structural repair works, but that's a time-limited exemption of 12 months. Again, we don't have any discretion over that. It is 12 months. So once a long-term empty property's had that, they will be subject to standard charge, but now also the premium, which is currently at 100% for long-term empty properties.
Thank you. I got a couple of quick questions, if nobody else on the panel does. This 60, can't remember what the exact figure was now, to a decimal place. But what number of properties or households are there to deliver that 64, wasn't it?
Yeah. So the total number of properties on the council tax list, so that is maintained by the Valuation Office Agency, was 66,221 as of October, which is a growth of 405 properties from the same point last year. So, within Powys, we have seen I think a healthy growth of new properties coming onto the list. But then that's where we calculate it back down to the Band D equivalent. So, a proportion of those will be Band A's, B's and C's, and some will be greater than the Band D. So it's all apportioned, and that's what's led to the overall growth in the tax base calculation of 279.97, which is a 0.44% increase from last year.
And we quite often describe, or Jane quite often uses the word, we've got a strong tax base compared to other local authorities. I'm not sure how to phrase this, but can you make that comparison with, some local authorities have a much average, a smaller average value or average banding? Can you explain that, Jane, perhaps, and explain how that impacts the council tax raised?
If you had a similar number to us of the same number of properties, but where they would all be at a lower banding, so A's, B's and C's, then your council tax base would actually be lower. So although you've got the same number of properties, it would lead to a lower council tax base. Similarly, if you've got more properties than we would have at the higher bandings, then that will dictate that. But collectively then, all of those council tax base calculations feed into Welsh Government at a national level, and that total council tax base and the individual base calculation actually impacts on the level of funding that we then receive through the RSG. So Welsh Government's, the formula that dictates funding that comes to all authorities is very much based around that council tax base. So if you've got a higher base, you get less in terms of settlement. So it's considered to be an assessment of the ability to pay council tax. But of course, for Powys, we very often have that debate, particularly around budget setting time, in terms of it's not necessarily an indicator of ability to pay in terms of that base calculation, but that's how it all fits together. And it's a very complicated formula. It is published, and there is a description that's published if members wish to go and look at that, or I can distribute it round. But it is very significant as part of that funding calculation.
Yes, thanks, Jane, and that's what I was driving at as well. You know, having a strong council tax base does impact on the RSG that's paid to us by Welsh Government with a really strong council tax base. I don't know if any local authorities have their council tax base greater than the number of households, or can you get it beyond 100%? Because we're quite fairly close to it, aren't we? 64 compared to 66, roughly. Others might be sort of in the 50s, potentially, you know, 60. Good morning, David. Good to see you. So it can have significant impact on our RSG, and it's personally, I don't think it's an indication of ability to pay, because the average wages within Powys are one amongst the lowest within Wales. A few years ago, it just used to be Blaenau Gwent that were below us. So I do have real issues with the funding formula going forward, and I'm afraid that any revaluation will have accentuate this problem. So it'd be really good to understand what Welsh Government are planning around that. Karina, sorry.
I'm sorry, I just didn't understand. Does it mean having a strong council tax base means you get less money from the Welsh Government?
Yes.
Yes, basically, it's because a bigger percentage of our total funding comes from local council tax collection.
Thank you very much.
We in Powys, we're roughly sort of 30% self-funding.
Yeah.
And in some local authorities in South Wales, there's down as near 20% self-funding. So it is really problematic. Well, Powys residents see it as problematic, put it like that. Chris.
Yeah, well, it comes back into the thing that we are asset rich but cash poor in that sense.
Yeah.
And you're right to flag up that the wages within Powys are very significantly different to elsewhere. And that then leads into the pressure on cost of living. I mean, even though inflation has started to dip a little bit, it's still having a significant impact out there of people's ability to pay. Hence my question. I don't know if it's Jane or Andrew have we noticed any deterioration in the amount of council tax payments coming in? You know, with cost of living and that pressure, because sometimes you'll get a drag before you actually start to see that as an impact, and it's continued on for a longer period. And obviously with interest rates being also higher than what people were paying a few years ago, that's having more pull on people's disposable income. So it's whether we're starting to see any effect on that, or if we have revaluation, we can do that revaluation going forward into 2025 if that's what is announced tomorrow. But it really doesn't help us in that sense, because if people haven't got the monies now, I can't see in 2 years' time that there's going to be any increase you know, coming through. So people are still going to be having this pressure on their disposable income, and it will just enhance the challenges that we face going forward.
Thank you, Chris. Jane or David, Andrew, I don't know if one of you want to pick up on that, but
yeah, Andrew, I'm hoping Andrew's got the up-to-date figures in terms of the collection rate. And I think we were seeing it when we look at equivalent points in the year in previous years. I think we were slightly down, but not significantly down, I think is the position, isn't it, Andrew?
Yeah, I think end of Q2, we're 0.2% down comparing to the same point last year. But you know, we're flexible in the repayment arrangements. You know, a lot of customers converting over to 12 monthly, not going away from the statutory 10 months, which would, you know, historically pay from April to January, and no council tax payments in February and March. Again, a much larger tax base paying over the full 12 months. So inevitably that would hit the first 3 quarters performance, but the money would come in Q4. So marginally down, but not of great concern at the moment. But you know, this is where the discounts, exemptions, council tax reduction comes in, so that, you know, when we're engaging with customers, we're making sure that they're, you know, they're paying the right amount of tax on that bill. So it's you know, the discounts, exemptions, any reliefs are, if they're entitled to them. So yeah, the money advice team is extremely busy at the moment, getting lots of referrals and supporting the Powys residents to maximise their income. So and not just council tax, you know, they will look to maximise all social security benefits that the customer could be entitled to and hasn't applied for.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. That's really important work done there. And the rates, payment rates are remarkably resilient. There was a bit of a drop off during COVID, and but it was really striking how resilient Powys taxpayers are, and really good at paying the council tax. Doesn't matter how hard it gets, they still pay the council tax, and always very grateful about that, because our services rely on it. Jeremy.
What I was going to ask, Ali, the commercial taxation, council tax, what is our collection rates on that? And have we noticed a drop off? Because I know a lot of people now are starting to struggle. Work is starting to dry up with in the building trade, especially as people are feeling the pinch. And I'm just wondering, have we seen anything, and do we think that we're going to see in our projections going forward?
Andrew, on the business rates, right, NDR, that you collected on behalf of the Welsh Government, really, don't you? But
yes, so
collection rates
is redistributed, so we get an element from as part of the funding from Welsh Government. So Powys is what we call a gainer from the pool. So we, you know, we can collect just under around 30 million, but we get back significantly more than that from Welsh Government. But that just is, you know, within the RSG calculation as well. But business rates collection is actually up on previous years. Largely, we've been very proactive in promoting and awarding the retail, leisure and hospitality rates relief scheme. We've had a scheme for several years now. This year it's 75% off the rates bill. So I think in 22-23 we had the highest spend of allocated monies in Wales. So you know, we put a lot of work and effort into contacting businesses that should be getting it to make sure they are getting it. We're at around 95% spend of our allocated fund already this year. So you know, we keep going, keep targeting, we're phoning, we're emailing customers to make sure that, you know, if we're entitled to 75% off their rates bill, that they're getting that discount and only paying what they need to be paying. So in-year collection is actually up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to you and your team. I know you do a huge amount of work around that. It's really important. So thank you, Andrew. Just one final question from me, unless anybody else has got a question. What is the total cost of all the various discounts, as you call it? It was over £30 million 4 or 5 years ago. Do you have a figure for all those various discounts across?
For council tax?
Yes, so council tax, yeah.
If you could, yeah, I can go and find them.
You can drop an email sometime.
Okay.
But what I'm indicating is it is a significant element.
Yeah.
I think we may be around the £100 million collection, and council tax delivers about £100 million to the revenue of. Have we broken the £100 million barrier this time, or is next time we potentially break the £100 million barrier for council tax?
Oh, it's significantly over that now.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to look at my notes. But brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. If you could drop a note on that to Kath or Jane, I'd be grateful. Thank you very much, everybody, on that item. And croeso I Councillor David Thomas. Thank you for joining us, David. I understand you had other commitments until now. We've been talking about council tax base, going through the minutes and stuff. But next on the agenda is the revenue report as of the 30th of September for the second quarter. So can I hand over to you, David, to introduce us, please?
Yes, I'll take you through that, Chair. I've pasted the report as usual, so I'll just give you the highlights from it. And obviously, you'll have read the report, and members will have read the report, and you can ask any questions relevant to the total report when I've finished. So this is the revenue budget outturn forecast for 23-24 financial year, which is based on the position as at the 30th of September 2023. The projected position currently reports a £2.85 million surplus, which, when compared to the position reported at quarter one, is a deterioration of nearly £900,000. The surplus position continues to be largely associated with expenditure against corporate budgets, particularly the £3 million risk budget, with £234,000 being drawn from this budget during the first 2 quarters of the financial year. The risk budget will be released to services as costs materialise. This becomes more likely as the year progresses, and we expect demand to increase across our services. Cabinet will be aware of the negotiations that have been ongoing around employees' pay for 23-24. A 5% pay award for teachers and head teachers, effective from September 2023, was agreed earlier in the autumn, and the pay award for national employers for local government services staff is going to be circa 7%, and that's has actually now been recently agreed. The budget set by Council back in March does not fully meet the estimated costs of these pay awards, which has resulted in a funding gap. Although the projected outturn position being reported in this report is welcomed, it's prudent to draw attention to the challenges faced by the Council next financial year and across the medium term. These challenges cannot be underestimated. Inflation and increased demand for services continues to create pressures on our finances, with the national outlook for local government, as described by the Welsh Local Government Association, being extremely bleak and stating that options for many local services will be unpalatable. Appendix A of the report provides more detail at a service level, with heads of service providing detailed commentary in Appendix B. Since quarter one, children's services have reported further unavoidable pressures, which has pushed the overspend position up to £853,000 after receiving £234,000 from the risk budget. The pressures faced across the children's service area is primarily due to the increase in demand for placements for children with complex needs, compounded by a national shortage of provision alongside an increase in the number of children who are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. The service continues to address the current position in year to identify mitigations to reduce any impact of increased budget pressures for the next financial year. The Council has plans and is managing its budget this financial year, but we continue to respond to the increasing challenges we face. Corporate budgets largely attributable to the capital schemes being delayed and the subsequent reduced need to borrow has meant that the costs of borrowing for the year are lower than those projected. This provides us with an opportunity to fully fund services for the 23-24 pay award in the current financial year by realigning budgets. This will remove some of the pressure contributing to the budget gap for the next financial year. With regard to cost reductions, services continue to deliver the cost reductions planned this year. The summary at Table 2 shows that 62% or £10.8 million of the cost reductions have been delivered, and a further 33% or £5.7 million are assured of delivery by services. £0.9 million, 5% are unachieved and are at risk of delivery in year. I think that's one of the best performances by the end of Q2 on savings for quite some time, so that's a credit to all concerned, but there are still some concerns around the savings. So services are being challenged as to why the position for some proposal has changed, and respective service areas are required to consider mitigating action to ensure that they can deliver within the budget allocated. Services that show unachieved targets must consider what remedial action they must now take to ensure that they deliver within budget this year. With regard to the reserves position that's reported in Table 3, schools set their budgets with an expected call on their reserves of £5.1 million. This figure has worsened by £1.4 million based on updated forecasts, leaving a likely deficit reserve balance at the year end as shown in Table 4. These are challenging times for our schools, and the authority continues to provide an appropriate level of challenge and support to assist schools with their budget recovery plans. Additional grants have been received by the Council during this quarter and are reported in Section 5.1. These will be incorporated into the budget. With regard to environments, Section 5.2 and 5.3 of the report sets out a number of environments to be considered by Cabinet. Environment requests are detailed in Section 5.2 for consideration and approval by Cabinet. In summary, these include environment of £249,000 from the Transport Replacement Reserve to public transport in order to meet contractual payment uplifts. Environment of £130,000 from winter maintenance operations to street works to mitigate the unachieved savings target, which is due to delays in consultation. The savings expected to be in place for 24-25. And environment of £352,780 between the budget for public transport and car parks is requested in order to mitigate the unachieved savings target. This is due to delays in consultation, and the saving is expected to be in place for 24-25. Section 5.3 sets out two further environments which, if approved today, will be recommended to Council for approval in December. The first of these environments relate to transport, and specifically the environment of base budget from public transport to schools transport in order to allow the bus emergency support grant to be used to support public transport during 23-24. The second environment relates to the 23-24 pay award pressures referred to earlier in the report. Cabinet is asked to recommend that £1.8 million is via the service staffing budgets to meet the 23-24 pay award costs by reducing the corporate budget which supports the cost of borrowing. The proposal is affordable recurrently. We are able to delay the borrowing needed into future years as capital schemes are not incurring outlay in line with the original plans, and as we consider the use of other funding sources, such as capital receipts before borrowing. With regard to financial risks, Section 6 of the report highlights the financial risks we continue to face. And at this stage, I'll hand over to the 151 officer, which might want to comment on the report as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. The position that we see ourselves in is welcomed currently, based on the pressure that we're seeing across all councils. I think in terms of our budget position, we are in a reasonable position. We are seeing those pressures much the same as other local authorities, but we are able to manage that through the risk budget that we set up. And I think that's really standing us in good stead currently in this financial year. Concern does remain for the next few years that we're about to embark on, particularly around budget setting for next year. As already mentioned, I think earlier in the session today about inflation, and it is still very much impacting on us as a council. And although it's lower, those costs are still rising. and that the rises we've seen already are already embedded in the prices that we pay. So it's just worth noting that we are still under significant pressure as we look to put a budget proposal together for next year. So just want to reiterate on that. In terms of that planning over the longer term, we've spoken around sustainable powers and looking to establish a council at a lower cost to enable us to manage our services within the funding that we will have available to us as we move through the next 2 years. So a challenging position for everyone, and we're not immune to that. So it's really in that context in which we're reviewing this report and setting those budgets for the future. Thank you, Chair.
Diolch, Jane. Members, Elwyn, you hand up.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Thank you for the report. Well, I'm going to rehearse a well-practiced tune on what strikes me in particular, and I know we've got discussion on Friday with this, is 4.2, schools. And what's striking, of course, is the budget figure has worsened by 1.4 million based on updated forecast. It goes on to mention, of course, the need to advise and work with schools, and wearing my chair governor's hat, yes, people can say that as much as they want, but I think sooner or later somebody has to face up to the reality that there's not enough money going into the secondary sector as a whole. And I think the funding formula has complicated that, and I think that needs to be highlighted, because otherwise in 12 months' time the deficit will be even larger from what I can see.
Diolch, Elwyn. Before David responds to that, we do see in the use of reserves, and it's balanced off by surplus within the education across the schools. But clearly the secondary sector is it's got a negative reserve if you break down the secondary sector away from the primary sector. And that's not truly reflected in these papers, is it? It's a difficult one, and I'm not sure how that could be better reflected. It looks as though the schools are living within their means. But anyway, David.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the position has deteriorated, but my understanding is, reading a further report, that a lot of the deterioration within the secondary sector in particular is down to just 2 or 3 particular schools where there are significant deficits. And I think it's just worth bearing in mind as well that when we set these budgets, and when schools were actually working on the initial budgets that they were allocated, there was an expectation that a lot of the financial pressures would have eased by this time, by the late autumn. Certainly by December, there was an expectation that inflation would have been running at about 2 to 3%. That hasn't happened. So the environment is still very, very challenging. But we're not alone in that. I think if you look at all Welsh authorities, we were pretty much all in a similar position. At the end of the day, what money we've got, we'll allocate. We'll give as much as we possibly can to schools. But there's no magic money tree, and if we're going to take extra money into schools, we've got to take it from somewhere else, and all services are under pressure. But as far as the management of this budget's concerned, this year's budget's concerned as well, I think it's a credit to the school support teams that have been going into schools, and they've been doing some first-class work there, and there are significant improvements. And we've also got the benchmarking tool to work with as well now. So progress is being made, but it is undoubtedly very, very concerning.
Thank you, David. I'd said you weren't here at the beginning of the meeting, but we clearly got joint scrutiny on Friday with Finance Panel and the Education, Learning and Skills Scrutiny Group, chaired by Gwynfor. I hope you'll be able to join us there, along with, I assume, the Portfolio for Education as well. We'll be joining us there. Just before we bring Arwel in, Appendix A, it's got right at the bottom, just above the totals. You've got that 85 revised £1 million base budget for schools. Does that include the use of reserves or not? There's a forecast use of reserves of, I can't remember what it was before, without zooming back up, of a roughly £5 million, or was it 3.5? I can't Jane, does that 85 include that or not?
No, what you're seeing is the budget set.
Yes, I know.
So when we're monitoring the budget, we do monitor against the budget actually set. So the budget set would already include that use of reserves of the 5.3 million, I think it is. So the other figure then reports the difference over and above that budget set. So that would be either an increased use of reserves or a reduced level of reserves would be the variance that you would see in that final column.
Yes, and that does cause difficulty for future years, doesn't it? When you're using reserves to bolster in-year revenue, so that will create huge problems going forward. And in a way, that table, Appendix 4, there doesn't. Sorry, Appendix A doesn't truly sort of reflect that, but I accept the explanation given. But it was clearly a conscious decision at the budget time to underfund the schools to, I think it's about 3.2 or 3.5 million pound, wasn't it? And expect them to use reserves, even though some schools did not have that reserve at that time.
I think when we set budgets back at the beginning of last year, there was clearly pressure across all services of the council, and schools weren't immune in terms of that. School reserves at that point in time had significantly been increased at the end of the previous year. And I think you look at all the resources available to everybody when you're planning a budget. And I think it was on that basis, but I think it was also recognised that, as we always say, you can only use reserves once. So obviously that was part of the consideration, and I think the pressure was already factored into the year 2 of the budget at that point in time, recognising that schools would not necessarily be able to maintain that level of support from their reserves over the longer term. I think it's worth noting, you know, schools are under the same pressure as all services, and we're seeing that across Wales. I think school budget and the level of deficit across Wales has increased during this year. And I think looking forward, with pay awards at the levels that they are, that pressure is increasing year on year. And particularly looking forward in terms of the projections that we think we may get in terms of funding, that squeeze is going to be even tighter and tighter. And with a bigger share of the council's budget go into schools, you know, we're not necessarily going to be able to fully protect schools as we move through the next few years either. So that work with schools is absolutely fundamental to the support that we give them, and that is ongoing now. And I think the reports that you'll see at scrutiny on Friday gives you much more detail around the work that's been having and the value that work is then given in terms of the budget position.
No. Brilliant. Thank you, Jane. It'd be fine if the reserves sat centrally, but they sit within individual schools, and that's an issue going forward. Arwel, you seem to slip down the list. Your hand up was first, and now you slipped on the list. Would you have any gunter?
Okay, diolch, thank you, Chair. Councillor Elwyn actually sort of stole not my thunder, but sort of stole exactly what I was going to say, because obviously, if you recall, I did highlight it at the last sort of finance meeting, where they're showing the reserves going from about 6 million down to about 1 million. And then we've just been told now that by the end of the year, we could have a deficit reserve figure. But in my sort of vocabulary, you can't have a deficit reserve, because once the money's gone, there's no reserve. So, but I'll wait with interest to see the meeting on Friday. So yeah, thank you, Chair. Diolch,
Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Aled. I just had a couple of comments, if I may. On the children's services, I understand the use of unavoidable, because obviously we need to provide these services. But I just wanted to try and understand why these circumstances weren't foreseen and budgeted for, or why some contingency reserve wasn't put there. And then I guess following on from that is what have we learned from this to better forecast increase for demand And will this be incorporated into budgets and forecasts going forwards?
I'll give you two. David, did you want to pick, or Jane, pick it up?
I can pick that up, Chair. In terms of children's services, we did estimate that there would be a likely pressure on the service. So you'll recall within the budget approved, we hold a risk budget. And at the beginning of the year, we had estimated pressures that could materialise during the year, and those would have included some for children's services. So we hold that money in that corporate risk budget and then release it to the service as those pressures materialise. So we did actually consider it, and we're managing it in that way. What will happen as we plan next year's budget is obviously where those costs are ongoing, then they will be built into the service budget if we're able at that level going through into the next year. And again, we will then identify any risk that those services are carrying. So we feel that that's been really effective in the past in terms of managing that, rather than fully funding services for what they think might happen. We do hold that to one side and release as we need to.
Thanks, Jane. I had another question, if I may, Chairman.
Yeah, please do.
I was looking at the environments, especially the ones under, I think 522, which is the winter maintenance, and 523 for the car parks, if I just summarise them as that. I think my sort of like just comment or concern about that is I worry by moving the figures around as this, we're sort of muddying the waters. And I think I would sooner see from I suppose, a focus or a forecast or a monitoring position to actually keep the losses and to keep the overachievements sort of separate, so as we could perhaps learn from that going forwards again into other exercises. By transferring the money around, for me, it's like robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it's just muddying everything. It makes both sides look good, whereas both sides may not be so good for different reasons. So I just wondered what the thoughts were around doing those environments.
And we tend to lose track of those environments as we go through the year, don't we? We forget about them, don't we, when it comes to the end of the year? But sorry, Jane.
Yeah, I think it is a difficult one, but the environment process and the effective management of budgets by services at that higher level is fundamental to services really managing their financial position really well. So the environment process is embedded within our financial regulations. It's a key part of that. And when you set a budget at the beginning of the year, it is an estimate. So having that flexibility at a service level where you see pressures coming and where you see gains elsewhere, it's fundamental to realigning that base to make sure that you can manage those costs. So I think environment is a key part of that budget process and is something that we should take on board. I think it's important to understand why those variances are coming to the fore and being absolutely clear that those environments don't upset that budget plan going through into future years as well. So I understand totally where Councillor Peter is coming from. You know, it's difficult to keep track of it, but it's also important the budgets are realigned so that we're not reporting significant variances all the time.
Thank you, Ginger. Following up on that a little bit, I know budgets are an estimate, but it's not the first time we've done a budget on these various areas within the council, and there are repeat offenders, if you see what I mean, that go over budget. Okay, of course there can be exceptional circumstances, but you do see, I shouldn't say repeat offenders, but areas of the council, and school transport is one area that's sort of year after year. School meals is another area year after year that are overspent, and other areas income is underestimated as well. And sometimes it feels as though you're taking the pressure off a particular area when you do that environment in year rather than sort of at the end of the year. You know, that pressure comes off that, oh no, that's deficit's been dealt with now. We can carry on as before, rather than that area looking to still keep to the original budget. But that's.
I think the challenge around the positions and ensuring that budget managers are accountable for their positions is a key part of that. And those environment decisions aren't taken lightly. You know, it's based on the evidence base to really show why those costs have come around and why the budgets need that realignment. So that challenge is a key part of it.
Can I just add to that,
yeah,
Chair,
please,
that with regard to the service budgets, obviously at the end of the day, the figure that I'm looking at is the total service budget,
the bottom line,
where that's going to be at the end of the day. But no, I think the flexibility that environments do allow within a particular service area is important. But I think what Councillor Peat is saying, he's quite correct in highlighting that, because if you're actually working on environment because of an underspend or an overspend within a particular part of a service area in 1 year, then you'd expect going forward to see the forecast becoming more accurate and an improvement, because in many ways environment should only be necessary if you get an unexpected impacts, basically, to a significant scale. But it is an important level of flexibility that is allowed within service budgets. But no, it's quite right to say we need to understand where these under and overspends are, and that things should improve going forward.
Yeah. Thank you, David. I think we're all basically in support of you there. Jeremy, was this on a different subject? Oh, and Pete, were you coming back on the same thing? Or
Sorry, Jeremy. Yeah, if I could just add one final thought or comment on it, I suppose. And if I used, I understand all what Councillor David and Jane have said as well. So yeah. But I suppose if I took the car parks as a very good example. At the moment, you know, we're projecting there like a £392,000 surplus, I think, on it. Does that mean then by doing this environment, you know, we will lose track of how much we've actually made surplus on those car parking charges? So next time, you know, that might drop to 10,000, and you know, you lose the impact of understanding all of that, I think, as we've agreed, to inform future pricing decisions. Thanks.
Jane.
Yeah, I think we track these budgets at a much lower level anyway. So the service will have an account code level budget, and they'll be able to focus on their actual. So even if you're not comparing it with a budget, you'll know what your actual income has been over a period of time. So there's all of that information that you don't necessarily see on the face of these reports. These are at a much higher level, aren't they? So we are able to track that consistently to have that informed information going forward when you're making further decisions in terms of pricing going forward.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, it's 394 is the sum quoted here, isn't it? What sort of percentage, perhaps you don't have to answer it now, of overachievement is that compared to income expected?
I would have to go and find that figure.
It'd be good to understand that, really, to see the level of overachievement. Sorry, Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you, Aled. No problem. For me personally, environments are important too, but they don't have to be shown as environments. We could show the accounts as the accounts are for the year ending and add the environments in. It's how we put the paperwork out that makes it confusing, not the issue of using environments. So I'm fully behind Pete on that. What I was going to ask was, when we have overspends on schools, does that come out of school reserves or capital, or where does that come from? On the school bills?
Oh, school bills.
Oh.
Can we deal with that with the capital report afterwards?
Okay, then. And
just keep the capital and revenue separate.
Well, let's just use Brecon High School. Brecon High School was built 30% too big for the amount of children, right? So when we're building schools which are too big for the amount of children, and we don't follow through on the policies that were agreed, then you can't then hold that school to account for an overspend when something was built which is vastly oversized for the amount of pupils. You know, people have to stand up and take responsibility for that. That's not down to the school. They can't be held for that because they have a population of the pupils of X against the size of a building which is Y, which is vastly oversized. for what they need. So someone needs to take responsibility for that part of the overspend. So I'm just giving that one as then. So there's some failure there. The other one, coming to buses, which is a huge cost to us. At the moment now, we're going to force buses, so I'm led to believe, into having disabled access on all buses, which don't even have no need. There is no person there with disabilities. This in turn is a cost now to the bus companies. So then that cost is going to be passed on. We're then scrapping perfectly good buses to force them into Euro 6, I believe is the next move. That again is going to have a huge cost. So the implement of legislation is part of the reason that we're going to have these massive costs, because you're talking £250,000 for a bus plus. So they are going to pass on. What we need to do is have a more phased approach to where we're going and common sense, because otherwise what is going to happen, and if you look at the amount of bus companies that have gone to the wall in the last 10 years or don't no longer exist, when you cease to have competition, you will have to pay them whatever the person wants to charge you. And getting rid of competition is not healthy. And what we're doing, legislation is destroying this business and it's pushing people out. And indirectly, our costs will go up as a result of that. And I just think we need to phase stuff in, working with bus companies. I know we want to have a fairer, greener Powys, but fairer and greener, crushing a perfectly good bus is not fairer and greener. It's stupidity, in my opinion. So that was my point I'd like to make. So,
thank you, Jeremy. I know we don't have the expertise from the service here, but year after year we've had a derogation from central government not to introduce that. I can't remember what it's called now. PSVR or around disabled access. Nobody ever thought it would apply to school buses. Sorry, Gareth. Oh, I thought Gareth was coming up with the answer then. But you make a really valid point, Jane or David. Would you wish to comment on that?
The only thing I'd say, Chair, is that I think a lot of the legislation that Councillor Jeremy is referring to is coming down either from central governments or sometimes from Welsh governments. And the point I keep making, I've recently had some meetings with some members of the Senate, and I keep making the point that if they expect us to implement these initiatives, then the money needs to come with it. Because with the present condition of public finances, for local authorities, we simply can't deliver what they want us to deliver. And I've said all along with regard to the net zero 2030 target, that the majority of schemes in that, the very, very large schemes, we're not going to deliver simply out of our RSG, and it's going to have to be additional funding coming either from Welsh Government or from central government. But yes, so I do accept that it's a major challenge, and we simply don't have the funding to implement that at the moment.
And we have received grants in the past for, I can remember, 8 or 10 buses in my time for, and you're right, it's about £250,000 a shot, weren't there, Jeremy? So it's not small money, is it?
Can I just say one last thing?
Jeremy? Yeah.
We're sending children to school in cold classrooms, right? If it's a poor legislation, we're elected to represent the people of our areas. It's time we stood up and said, this is unaffordable. We can't do it. We won't implement it. And we're going to put the interest of our public first. Just pushing these policies through like a begging dog is absolutely ridiculous. Sorry, but we've got to stand up as a group, all of us together, and say, we can't deliver at this moment in time, or you're going to force our prices up. But this just isn't about buses. There's other legislation coming through which are having massive costs. And I'm not against the legislation, but you can't send children into a cold classroom to deliver legislation which you don't believe in. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. I know it's been been pushed, and I'm sure David is doing exactly the same. And other councils, I wish everything was put into the RSG, and neither councils decide on their own priorities.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that's
Chair, if I can
maybe
just
wishful
give
thinking. But
yeah, if I can just add to that, the WLGA are putting significant pressure on Welsh Government, and who hopefully in turn will put pressure onto central government on the basis of this funding, following the legislation. But it is an issue, and it affects all councils, so it's right to highlight it. Yeah.
Thank you. Before Pete, I don't know whether I just want to pick up one more thing on the environment. The first one there, you've got that environment of using the transport replacement reserve. That's not just for buses, is it? That was for all vehicles across HDR, I assume, that transport replacement reserve, because there was a raid on that reserve during the last budget, wasn't there? In paragraph 521, David. And I assume that was all revenue going into that replacement reserve and not capital going into that replacement reserve. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to use it to prop up the, was it T12? Can't remember.
There's the T12 service,
which is the Aberystwyth
to
Wrexham.
fund that. Yeah, I don't have the details other than what it says there. I don't know if Jane has any more information around that.
If I can come in, because Councillor David isn't aware of this, but actually this report hasn't formally been considered by Cabinet yet, as you all know. This is the scrutiny of it, but we don't believe that environment is actually now required. The budget decision was actually made at budget setting, and I don't think that's necessarily been reflected in the detailed budgets for that particular element. So we believe that has already been amended, and that environment is now not required, but we're just finalising that before you present that report formally to Cabinet next week, Councillor David.
Okay, because again, you're potentially having a capital receipt from selling 3 buses or something and using that. Anyway, it is problematic paragraph. I'm glad. Can you let us know outcome of that, please, Jane? It's important that we get that right, because when David went through his narrative, I hadn't picked it up on reading it, because I must admit I skimmed through it, but when David said it during his narrative, I caught it then. So it is a bit troubling that 521. So please update us as quickly as possible. Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Aled. I was just trying, or I just want to try and check my understanding on 531, the 1.8 million regarding the pay award. So if I'm understanding that correctly, then it's sort of saying that will be funded by an underspend in the cost of borrowing in the capital programme. So I guess that means we haven't borrowed as much as we needed to borrow, which means we've, I don't know, simplistically saved interest costs. It's not that there's any sort of tangible saving as such. It's just we haven't borrowed so much and we saved on the interest, which is why we can use it to fund this. Is that right?
It's not just the interest element. So within that capital financing revenue pot, there are 2 elements. One is interest on borrowing, so that's actual interest, but the other is around the minimum revenue provision. So it's where you set aside revenue budget to be able to repay costs in the future. And that is dictated by when projects are finished and they become operational. That MRP commitment is then made at that point in time. And because we're seeing delays across the capital programme, those payments are not needed in this particular year. So that's where that budget is being released, because we believe that's not going to impact now for a few years down the line with some of these projects. Therefore, we can release that budget now on a permanent basis, although it will mean we'll have to re-estimate and recalculate the future commitments against that budget, and we will realign budgets then as we need to in the future. So I know it's very complicated, and it's not straightforward, straightforward, but I hope that gives you a little bit more information about what we're doing there.
Yeah, yeah, sorry, Ali. Yeah, thanks, Jane. Yeah, so it's not around, I suppose, simplicity. It's not like I've got a project that I need £10 capital for. It's around the cost of that project, the borrowing to do that project. That's where I'm making the savings.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I know you're a fairly new councillor, Pete, but a few years ago there's quite a bit debate around the MRP, wasn't there, and the profile of that. A lot of fun and games. Really, some people enjoyed that debate. Some gave up the. You can see David smiling there as well. So in interesting times, but you know, in an ideal world, you wouldn't be wiring that, Jane, would you? You'd just be taking the saving.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because it's almost like it's a one-off funding. If that capital project is going to go ahead in the future, that's just almost a one-off.
It's delaying it,
saving.
isn't it? Yeah.
I know. So thanks for that. Any other issues raised within this report? Clearly, we will have a look at that schools issue on Friday. But just a footnote to that, there has been significant progress made on the primary school sector, but the outcome for the secondary schools is actually worse after the intervention of education officers. But that's just a footnote. We can deal with that on Friday. Any other comments from members? No? David, we'll go on to the capital now, which is item 8. We are quick running out of time because I really do need to get to the financial planning stuff. So
yes, I've got another meeting. I think Jane has as well.
Yeah,
it's 11:15, something like that. We'll have to leave.
Yes,
this is very brief. It's a very brief précis of the capital forecast, so I'll go straight into it, Chair. So this report provides an update on the financial position of the Council's capital programme as at the 30th of September 2023. Following the successful award of additional grants and the reprofiling of budgets between financial years, the revised programme for 23-24 is budgeted at £96.32 million. At the end of Q2, actual spend amounts to £22.85 million, which represents 24% of the total budget, an increase of £15.24 million since Q1. 42% or £40.59 million of the capital expenditure is supported through borrowing. The interest cost for this is charged to the revenue accounts. The previous report to Cabinet showed the financial position on the revenue budget, future consideration of the use of other funding sources such as capital receipts before borrowing. With relation to grants received, Section 3 of the report details the grants that have been received and included in the capital programme. Section 4 sets out some reprofiling of budget between financial years for the housing revenue accounts, highways, transport and recycling, education and digital services. The capital receipts position is £1.24 million has been received so far this financial year, and further sales have been agreed to the value of £0.78 million. At this stage, it's expected that sales totaling £8.01 million could be achieved this financial year. Any delays in the selling process may see some receipts being received in the next financial year. So that's all I've got to say on this one. Chair, I don't know if the 151 officer would like to add any comment to that. No?
No, nothing to add.
Just quickly from me, I don't know whether other members have got comments to make. I do find it slightly disturbing, the section 5 on capital receipts. And this goes back to the first quarter. It's the expected achievement is slightly up now to just over £8 million, and it's just a fraction under £8 million last time at the end of the first quarter of £7.8 million. And the question was asked then, this back in June. These numbers were put into the public arena, and we did have that bit of feedback, Kath, from the service, and I'm trying to find it. Apologies. I found it now. And the commentary on the June first quarter was that the in the budget there was a sort of £5 million target, and the commentary in at the end of June, property services would progress of various assets, progress sales of various assets at any time and would be dependent on the sales being completed. Property services are hoping to obtain £7 million projected target within a reasonable time frame. So, you know, they were talking about a £7 million target, and the response from the service was, and the projected target noted is based upon the opportunistic approach from a third party for a large farm holding amounting to £5 million. This was in a response to the June report. Clearly, I have got big issues with that because of the scrutiny issues around a certain sale recently, and I'm quite shocked by hearing that. How can that be put in out there in a public document that they're expecting to achieve £7 million sales due to the opportunistic approach from a third party for a large farm holding amounting to £5 million? Can you explain that, David? And that was reported out in June at the first quarter.
That was in the capital report at the first quarter.
Yes, that the expected sales would be would achieve a target of £7.8 million, and this was picked up at the last one, and a note came back from the service saying, and that's a bit I read out.
All right, I haven't seen that note, so it wouldn't be correct for me to comment on the note itself, but as far as the actual report that was presented to Cabinet and the Finance Panel, the part you've read out there, well, that would be appropriate. But the comments that have been made by the service, I haven't seen that.
Because there was a big issue around receipt of information for scrutiny. We don't have to go repeat all that, David, but the Farm Working Group only had information a week or so before the Cabinet decision was made, and prior to that they had no knowledge of this. And back on the 30th of June, this is published. It wasn't actually published, but it was written.
The note.
No, sorry, the capital receipt report talking about the £7.8 million.
Yeah, but that didn't actually go into the specifics around that sale, as you say. You've got a note from the property service. That's the point I'm making. But as far as the capital receipts element of the capital report was concerned, that was just putting it at a high level.
Okay, no, and that note was explaining the £7.8 million.
I've not seen that note, as I say. Yeah.
Okay, we do need to take this up at some point, because it's not acceptable for scrutiny committees to be kept in the dark on such matters. Thank you, David. Elwyn.
Well, yes, on that point, because yeah, again, I won't go over old ground, but it has been topic of conversation in many meetings, and we have a group leaders meeting Wednesday. Perhaps we need to highlight it there, I would suggest, but it would be good to have a proper timeline of when and who knew the information in relation to this sale, which nobody can discuss anyway, to have full clarity, and especially for the benefit of the Farm Working Group and the audit or the scrutiny committee, I would suggest.
we'll pick that up in readiness for the group leaders meeting then.
Thank you, Jane. No other comments on the capital report. The environments. Sorry, I was looking at the I was looking at the wrong report. Apologies. I was looking at the quarter one. With environments within this capital report, just checking.
Thanks,
James. No, there wasn't any.
No, just a bit of reprofiling. Oh, hello, James.
Hello. Did you want to pick up on the point that about schools that was made when you were talking to revenue discussion?
Yes, apologies. Thank you, James, for reminding us.
Yeah.
I hope, is Councillor Razor Point still here? I can't see him. Is Jeremy still there?
Councillor Jeremy still on the call, Chair.
Okay, hopefully he'll be able to hear. Sorry, James.
Yeah, any over or underspend on capital schemes is picked up corporately, but obviously that will have an impact on the revenue budget, the cost of borrowing. It doesn't affect any schools directly. Revenue, the schools run with costs.
Yeah,
it doesn't come out of the school reserves either.
No. Okay. I think part of Jeremy's point was there's a larger running cost for a larger school, even though there may be spare capacity within that school, and that's what his concern was. But thank you for reassuring Councillor Pugh that the capital spend doesn't impact on the delegated budget. Sorry, Jane, your hand's still up.
Yeah, no, just to pick up on that, in terms of revenue cost of running a school, the size of the school dictates the allowance that's given to the school in terms of the funding formula.
Yeah.
So, even if the school's not up to capacity, they would be funded based on the area of the school rather than the specific. There is an element of pupil numbers because obviously that does impact on running costs, but most of those energy costs are picked up based on the size of the school.
Okay, thanks, Jane. I know Jeremy was popping in and out of the meeting, so hopefully we can report back or pick that up with him in the future sometime. Thank you, David, Councillor Thomas, for your capital programme report. We now want to go into confidential session to discuss the financial planning going forward. But I need somebody to stick their hand up. Gareth, and do we have a seconder as well, please?
Yeah, happy to second, Chair.
Brilliant. Diolch Arwel. So, Kath, can we come off air and go in so we can go into confidential session, please?